Hello and welcome to another very special edition of Friends of Dorothy RETRO-SPECTIVES. Why do I say special? Well, the content is an even more intense and deep step back in time in pop culture. It is the TV themes of the 1960s. What does this have to do with the sitcom Friends of Dorothy, you might be asking? There are countless references to many of the shows that I will be celebrating in this instalment in my show. These were my earliest influences, long before I knew what a top 40 chart was or how many beats per minute were in a dance song. The TV shows of our youth offer the very first insights into storytelling, entertainment, and, more broadly, the human experience. Although Australia had 4 networks when I was a child in the 1960s and 70s, and we were making heaps of local content, it was the international programs, particularly from America, that saturated our schedules and monopolised our viewing habits. Well, certainly in my house. From an early age, I was drawn to the quirky, the inventive, and the light-hearted. So many seeds were planted from watching these TV series that would still bear fruit more than half a century on when writing my own sitcom. So, where to begin? Actually, with a campy, oftentimes silly, but endlessly entertaining and evocative pop culture classic. That was Neil Hefti's vibey theme to the live-action comedy romp Batman, which was produced for 3 seasons from 1966 to 1968, creating 120 episodes. I love the colour and movement, the litany of guest criminals, and the marvellous actors who inhabited them. From the regulars, Julie Newmar as the Catwoman, Burgess Meredith as the Penguin, Frank Gorshin as the Riddler, and my favourite, Cesar Romero as the Joker. As a child, I was a little scared by this show, as our dynamic duo, played so vividly by Adam West and Burt Ward, were caught up in potential life-threatening scenarios every week. But something would always save them. But those cliffhangers, the writers brought some really wild and wacky villains into the piece. The Bookworm, King Tut, Ma Parker, Mr. Freeze, just to name a few. That was only years later did I appreciate the roll call of A-listers and some B-grade stars that had graced the series. Oscar winners like Anne Baxter, Shelley Winters, and icons like Eartha Kitt, Tallulah Bankhead, and Vincent Price strutted their stuff. I love the slanted camera angles, the stylized look and feel of the scripts and the production elements, and the ever so slightly homoerotic connection between Bruce Wayne and his ward, Dick Grayson. It was all a bit silly, but it was billed as a comedy, and it never really took itself too seriously, even with all the menace and foul play going on. My first memory of being a writer was at age 11. I sat down and tried to create my own scripts for Batman. I kid you not. That lasted about a week, but I had a go. I could do all the pows and the oofs and all the graphic words. That was easy, but the plots, the scripts, a little trickier. But the urge to be a writer never left me. So I can thank Batman for giving me that spark that lit the flame. Another pair of silly shows, but eminently lovable, were this duo of nutty, creepy families.
They're creepy and they're kooky, mysterious and spooky. They're all together ooky, the Addams Family. Their house is a museum. When people come to see them, they really are a scream, the Addams Family.
Neat. Sweet. Petite.
So get a witch's shawl on, a broomstick you can crawl on. We're gonna pay a call on the Addams Family.
That was the Addams Family, which ran for just 2 seasons from 1964 to 1966. I would have enjoyed reruns in the 1970s. And of course, it is still syndicated now. But as a child, I loved how bizarre and downright out there this series was. The hot-blooded Gomez, played so dashingly by John Aston. The gloriously macabre yet beautiful and elegant Morticia, inhabited by Carolyn Jones. For you trivia buffs, both John Aston and Carolyn Jones guest starred on Batman. He filled in as the Riddler and she as Marsha, Queen of Diamonds. The rest of the Addams Family were even more weird, especially cousin It, with the high-pitched, unintelligible chatter. There was the Thing, the hand in a box, Lurch, the guzzling plant Cleopatra, and the goofy Uncle Fester, played with relish by Jackie Coogan. It was all a lot of fun, inventively dark, but always played with a lightness of touch. And then there was this similarly ooky program. The Munsters was in production the same years and number of seasons as The Addams Family, but The Munsters made 70 shows, beating its competition by 6. Similarly gothic and otherworldly, The Munsters seemed to attract more interest and notoriety in the era. Maybe it was just more lively than the often laid-back performance style of the Addams clan. Lily and Herman Munster, played to perfection by Yvonne Di Carlo and Fred Gwynne, were just an ordinary American married couple. Lily especially was a lot of fun, playing up the notion of the good housewife to her bumbling and shocking-looking mate, Herman. Fred Gwynne, who was already really tall, was given extra heel lifts and all that monster makeup and some padding, but was such a sweetheart that contrasted his menacing appearance. Grandpa, played by Al Lewis, was a mad professor type. As a child, I preferred the Addams Family from the Munsters, but rewatching them both as a young adult, it became the other way around. I got more laughs from the Munsters, but I can see artistically where Charles Addams' creation was more boutique and conceptually smart. The Munsters was more of a frolic, and with those larger-than-life leads, it was a delight to revisit. They both only ran for 2 seasons, but of course have lived on and on and on in reruns. Their opening titles told you everything you needed to know about the vibe of the shows. They were certainly creepy and kooky, mysterious and ooky. Staying with the supernatural, or otherworldly, were 2 shows that were, well, just magic. That was Bewitched, and it ran 8 seasons from 1964 to 1972, and was a perfect vehicle for the beautiful and talented Elizabeth Montgomery. It was one of the first series I watched that did the unthinkable. It recast its leading actor mid-run. Dick York, who played Darren, the husband, quit due to back problems, and the network wasn't ready to wind it up. So, for the final 3 seasons, Dick Sargent filled the role, but it wasn't the same. Samantha Stevens was a good witch who just couldn't resist a good twitch, and between her and the gaggle of family members, Mother Endora, played to wicked perfection by Agnes Moorehead, Aunt Clara, played by the delightful Marion Lorne, Uncle Arthur, played by the uber-camp Paul Lind, Cousin Serena, who was of course Elizabeth Montgomery, and the stern and protective Maurice, played by Maurice Evans. There was a seemingly endless amount of hijinks and mayhem on show, and for most of its run, Bewitched was a sparkingly fresh and interesting look at relationships and the advertising world. And of course there was all that hocus pocus. My favourite was Agnes Moorehead, who of course I had no idea at the time had been and still was a huge movie star with multiple Academy Award nominations under her belt. She was so mischievous and derisive of Durwood, Dolphin, Darwin, Dagwood, anything but Darren. You see where I pinched that comedic device of misnaming other characters? Guilty. Of course, one can't share Bewitched without I Dream of Jeannie. Jeannie was probably my favourite show of the era, and Barbara Eden, my pin-up girl. What a babe. So beautiful, so magical, pardon the pun, and so good at playing the naive, loving Jeannie. Larry Hagman was a perfect foil for her, and I also loved Bill Daly as the sidekick Roger, and the wonderfully droll Hayden Rourke as the ever-confuddled Dr. Alfred Bellows. Again, reruns allowed me the chance to see character actors like Rourke at work and see how much he could make of his supporting character. An eye roll, an eyebrow raise, a simple delivery of dialogue. He did it all and did it so effectively. But it was all about Barbara Eden. And this didn't occur to me until recently, but both Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie had female leads ahead of their male counterparts. Both women were credited before the men. For 1964 and 1965, this was revelatory, although perhaps credit should be given to a very famous talented redhead called Lucy. Lucille Ball paved the way for women in Hollywood. Jeannie ran 5 seasons between 1965 and 1970, and it didn't have the social commentary that its rival had, but it did have its share of cinematic tricks and concept episodes. Both are still running somewhere in the world, more than half a century since they were cancelled. Now that's magic. And Barbara Eden is still blinking at 94. So not magical, but certainly having a lend of its young audience, just a little, was this highly celebrated 60s program. If there's a theme that brings a tear to my eye, it is that one. It is such a cute reminder of my childhood and the incredible belief that we had in this marvellous marsupial called Skippy, the bush kangaroo. Running for 3 years between 1967 and 1970 and 91 episodes, the series really knew how to wring emotion out of its setup. The events that befell the park ranger, played stoically by Ed Devereaux, and his family. A young motherless boy played by Gary Pankhurst and his best friend Skippy had lots of adventures and foiled many crimes and potential disasters. Skippy would become an international sensation. The show and the animal. And to this day, I cannot fathom eating kangaroo meat. I just can't do it. I would be eating a friend ever true. And speaking of friends, who didn't love this next show and its titular character?
Just sit right back and you'll hear a tale of a fateful trip that started from this tropic point aboard this tiny ship. The mate was a mighty sailing man, the skipper brave and sure. 5 passengers set sail that day for a 3-hour tour, a 3-hour tour. The weather started getting rough, the tiny ship was tossed. If not for the courage of the fearless crew, the minnow would be lost. The minnow would be lost. The ship set ground on the shore of this uncharted desert isle, with Gilligan, the skipper too, a millionaire and his wife, a movie star, the professor and Mary Ann, here on Gilligan's Isle. So this is the tale of our castaways. They're here for a long, long time. They'll have to make the best of things. It's an uphill climb. But first mate and his skipper too will do their very best to make the others comfortable in their tropic island nest. No phone, no lights, no motor car, not a single luxury. Like Robinson Crusoe, it's primitive as can be. So join us here each week, my friends. You're sure to get a smile from 7 stranded castaways here on Gilligan's Isle.
Gilligan's Island captured my imagination like no other in my youth, as I really believed the castaways were stranded on that desert isle. I know, silly, but there it was. Bob Denver was such a brilliant, bumbling title character. He had great comedic and physical presence. His wide-eyed good nature, brought down by his dim personality, but he always had a good heart. The rest of the cast were also amazing. Alan Hale as the skipper, Jim Backus as the blustery millionaire Thurston Howell III, Natalie Schafer as his wife, Lovey. And then there was the rest. Tina Louise as Ginger, the movie star, Russell Johnson as the earnest professor, and Dawn Wells as the cutesy Marianne. As a production of this podcast, sadly only Tina Louise is still alive. You may recall I referenced Gilligan's Island in the episode titled Where There's a Will, There's a Way, as Gilligan is a regular in Simon's Bizarre Dream Life. I know their series was daft, but I was really invested in it as a child. So vivid was that setting, the premise, and the characters, even if it well and truly stretched credulity as to how they received all those visitors to the island, but never rescued. Anyway, a classic TV show and theme song. And here is another.
Come and listen to my story about a man named Jed. A poor mountaineer barely kept his family fed. And then one day he was shooting at some food, and up through the ground come a bubbling crude oil, that is, black gold, Texas tea. Well, the first thing you know, old Jed's a millionaire. The kinfolk said, Jed, move away from there. Said, California is a place you ought to be. So they loaded up the truck and they moved to Beverly Hills, that is, swimming pools, movie stars. The Beverly Hillbillies.
The Beverly Hillbillies was an incredibly successful sitcom that ran for 9 seasons from 1962 through to 1971, making 274 episodes. It spawned spin-offs and made superstars of its tight ensemble, led by the wonderfully crumpled and lovable Buddy Ebsen. His gorgeous but tomboy of a daughter, Ellie Mae, and his dim-witted but strapping nephew, Jethro Bodine, were fun. But it was the performance and inhabitation of the role of Granny that perhaps best personified the show. Irene Ryan, who played her, was simply nothing like her character. But that voice and her movements and outfits invented this unique figure in pop culture for the 1960s. She was much loved. Also good fun with a greedy banker and his ever-sturdy assistant, who, whilst harbouring a crush on Jethro, became something of a camp icon thanks to her ever so slightly butch manner. That was Nancy Culp. I think 9 seasons may have stretched the gag a little too thin, but the Beverly Hillbillies was a great fish out of water, rags to riches tale that was character-filled and fueled and often farcical. And speaking of farcical, here is one of the great dimwits of all time from the small screen. Another referenced character from Friends of Dorothy, that was Maxwell Smart, and the theme from Get Smart, the spy spoof series that ran for 5 years between 1965 and 1970. Don Adams was a comedic genius, finding not only that one-off character, but showing impeccable timing and sense of how to execute gags not only verbally but visually. He was given the Emmy 3 times for his performance in Get Smart. His co-star was the cool and elegant Barbara Feldon, who played Agent 99, and eventually his wife in the show. There's a catchphrase that I thought was worldwide, but seems to be Southern Hemisphere only, Australia and New Zealand really, and that is, good thinking 99, that Max would often quip, as he was pretty much always clueless, and she was invariably the smart one. Ed Platt as the dry, hapless chief was a lot of fun, as was Bernie Capel as the sinister but really stupid Siegfried. Co-created by Mel Brooks, Get Smart was just very inventive, but also really quite silly. It stands up remarkably well 60 years on. I'm not sure this next one does, but it has a great theme and it was a great piece of its time. That was Lost in Space, and the two themes that were utilised across its 3 seasons, composed by the one and only John Williams, the legend. This futuristic drama was camp to the max, thanks to the scene-stealing performance of one Jonathan Harris, who wasn't gay, but certainly gave off a vibe in his initial guest role as Dr. Zachary Smith. He became so popular, the writers made him, and the boy, played by Billy Mumy, the centrepiece of the plots, along with the bumbling booby that was the ever-loyal robot. This must have really stung the lead actors, Guy Williams and the wonderful June Lockhart, as they watched their show shanghaied by the supporting players. Lost in Space fascinated me. Again, a concept, like Gilligan's Island, where the viewer, well, this young viewer, believed what they were seeing on screen. Okay, there were some fairly dodgy looking monsters and special effects, but it was the mid-60s, and it was very evocative. The first 29 episodes were in black and white, and the other 54 in living colour. It was, above all, a good yarn of a show. Again, with those fantastic cliffhangers, of which I took note. Oh, the pain, as Dr. Smith would bemoan. Okay, from a visually out there piece to an animated show of a different kind, a cartoon.
From the town of Bedrock, they're a page right out of history. Let's ride with the family down the street, through the courtesy of Fred to Pete. When you're with the Flintstones, have a yabba-dabba-doo time, a dabba-doo time, we'll have a gay old time.
Before The Simpsons came along in the late 80s, the Flintstones were the first family of animation. And they were iconic, still are. Hanna-Barbera were onto something great with this clever spin on the Stone Age with 60s sensibilities. With 166 episodes made across its 6 years, The Flintstones was the first animated show to air prime time in America. It was a trailblazer. Just the sound of Yabba Dabba Doo brings back such wonderful memories of the oftentimes blustery but loyal husband and father, Fred Flintstone, and his antics, with his co-worker, best friend and next-door neighbour, Barney Rubble, and their wives, Wilma and Betty, respectively. Again, I felt compelled to pay homage in my sitcom by referencing them in Season 2. The Flintstones was a really fun show. It was so clever, both visually and in its ideas. And it was a fine take on the traditional sitcoms of the era, with the flawed patriarch, the kind, patient wife, and the wholesome children. I also loved the show due to the refrain in the song, "We'll have a gay old time," an expression I have tried to use often and with spirit. I don't think the songwriter meant what I had in mind. Moving on to my final picks for memorable TV themes from the 60s, and they are both towards the end of that decade. Both cheesy, family-friendly shows. Okay, so here's a story.
Here's the story of a lovely lady who was bringing up 3 very lovely girls. All of them had hair of gold, like their mother, the youngest one in curls. It's the story of a man named Brady who was busy with 3 boys of his own. They were 4 men living all together, yet they were all alone. Till the one day when the lady met this fellow, and they knew that it was much more than a hunch, that this group must somehow form a family. That's the way they all became the Brady Bunch. The Brady Bunch, the Brady Bunch. That's the way they became the Brady Bunch.
Here's the story of a lovely lady who was bringing up 3 very lovely girls. All of them had hair of gold, like their mother, the youngest one in curls.
It's the story of a man named Brady who was busy with 3 boys of his own. They were 4 men living all together, yet they were all alone. Till the one day when the lady met this fellow, and they knew that it was much more than a hunch, that this group must somehow form a family. That's the way we all became the Brady Bunch. The Brady Bunch, the Brady Bunch. That's the way we became the Brady Bunch.
Of course, what else could that be but the iconic Brady Bunch and its opening song? 2 versions. The second with the cast on vocals. The title sequence told its audience everything it needed to about the show. Those boxes on screen are in part what made this series so famous. And of course, a generation of folks, 40, 50 years later, using Zoom, refer to it as the Brady Bunch. They were so ahead of their time by 50 years. A clever setup. A lady with 3 daughters and a widower with 3 boys. Meet, fall in love, marry and live together. The end. No, not quite. 5 seasons and 117 episodes, and several spin-offs followed. Interestingly, it never divulged whether Carol Brady was divorced or widowed for some reason. The network just didn't want her to be either, so was not referenced. Throw in the lovable maid, Alice, played by Anne B. Davis, and a fabbo, groovy family was created. The Brady Bunch was very saccharine and very moral, but it did touch on some important social issues at the time, but pretty superficially. Florence Henderson perhaps emerged as the most popular of the cast due to her sunny disposition, and everybody seemed to want a mother like Carol Brady. That said, Alice did all the work and most of the parenting, so in hindsight, I'm unsure why she was perceived as such a great mom. Anyway, I digress. From one great mom to another, and my final theme for this instalment.
Hello world, here's a song that we're singing. Come on, get happy. A whole lot of loving is what we'll be bringing. We'll make you happy. We have a dream, we go traveling together. We spread a little love and it will
we'll keep moving on. Something always happens whenever we're together. We get a happy feeling when we're singing a song. Traveling along, there's a song that we're singing. Come on, get happy. A whole lot of loving is what we'll be bringing. We'll make you happy. We'll make you happy. We'll make you happy.
Academy Award winner Shirley Jones had it all. Looks, talent, a beautiful singing voice, and a TV series. The Partridge Family was about an all-singing family group, led by Shirley and her eldest son, played by her real-life stepson, David Cassidy, who would become a megastar pin-up during the show's 4-year run between 1970 and 1974. A little twee at times. Where the Partridge Family shone brightest for me wasn't the spunky David Cassidy or the sweet Susan Day as daughter Laurie, or the little moppets playing the younger children, but the situations mother Shirley faced as a single working parent to 5 children. Even as a kid myself, I couldn't but help notice that as it was a clear point of difference to most, if not all the other family shows that modelled a nuclear family, or at the very least always a mum and a dad, here was Shirley on her own. As of this episode of Friends of Dorothy Retrospectives being made, Shirley Jones is still with us, still radiant at 91. The Partridge Family celebrated music, song, and family life, and that proved a mainstay on so many TV shows of that era. Happier, Simpler Times, or A Distraction from the Vietnam War. You choose. There's a bit of social commentary for you there. I hope you've enjoyed this time-travelling roller coaster back to the 1960s. It has been a blast and joy to bring you the themes and wax lyrical about them. Stay tuned for another Friends of Dorothy Retrospectives. I will certainly have a follow-up to these international themes. There's a galaxy of wonder awaiting us in the 1970s and 80s. Until next time, thanks for listening. I'm David Rector. I wrote, produced and edited and voiced this instalment. The copyright is 2025 and all music used under fair dealing.